I've got a thought-provoking question for you today then, Raiders. The last time you ran into another Raider Topside, what was your first instinct? Did you lower your weapon first? Did you try engaging in proximity chat? Or did you immediately assume the worst of them? Because if you've spent enough time in Ark Raiders, then you start to notice something strange. Trust is incredibly valuable in this world, and almost nobody is willing to give it away so easily. Players can hesitate to cooperate, temporary alliances collapse quickly sometimes, and even peaceful encounters carry an undercurrent of suspicion. It's not that cooperation never happens, I would never suggest that, but it's that trust always feels fragile, and sometimes that fragility shows up in subtle ways. You might see another player and both of you pause for just a second. Neither of you fire at each other. Both of you are trying to read the situation. Maybe somebody crouches to signal they're friendly, maybe flashes their flashlight once or twice, or maybe somebody chooses to back away slowly instead of pushing towards you. But even in those moments, there's always a brief moment of tension, because at any second that silent agreement could disappear. So the real question here isn't whether or not Ark Raiders has a trust problem. The question is, why does this game make trust feel so risky in the first place? Well, to understand that, Raiders, we need to look at something much deeper than just game mechanics. We need to look at how humans behave when trust becomes a survival decision. Now, extraction games create a very specific psychological environment for us as players. Every raid carries real stakes. You have a time investment, you have the loot that you've gathered, you have progress potentially being lost. And when people operate under risk, their behaviour changes. Now, behavioural economists call this loss aversion. Humans tend to fear losing something they already have more than they value gaining something new. Now, in practical terms, that means a raider who has spent 20 minutes gathering gear isn't just protecting loot anymore. They're protecting time and effort. They're protecting the successful run that they've already built. So when another player approaches, the calculation doesn't become just social, it's mathematical. Can I trust them? Or is it safer to remove the risk entirely? And when the stakes are high enough, even neutral players start behaving defensively. You might not want to fight, but you also don't want to lose everything because you trusted the wrong person once. So the safest option becomes the most common one. Shoot first and ask questions later. And that's not because players are toxic, but because the system actually rewards caution. Now, there's a famous concept in game theory called the prisoner's dilemma. Two people have the option to cooperate or betray each other. If both cooperate, then they benefit together. But if one betrays while the other cooperates, then the betrayer gains the advantage. The problem is simple. Even if cooperation is the best outcome for both players, betrayal is often the safest individual choice. Now think about that dynamic. Inside Ark Raiders on Topside, two players encounter each other. They could choose to cooperate and they could share information. They could even help each other fight Ark machines. But there's always the possibility that one player will betray the other one. And because that possibility exists, many players choose not to risk it at all. And what's interesting here is that both players are usually thinking the exact same thing. I don't want to fight, but I also don't want to be the one who trusted first. And that hesitation creates a strange Mexican standoff, as it were. Two players, both unsure, both cautious, and sometimes the situation only ends when someone panics and finally pulls the trigger. Another interesting factor then is that Ark Raiders currently has very little persistent reputation in the game. Encounters are temporary, players rarely meet the same people twice, which means actions don't always carry any long-term consequence on Topside. Now, in real-world communities, as a contrast to this, trust builds because behaviour is directly remembered, reputation can spread, cooperation becomes beneficial over time because of this. But in a raid-based environment, most encounters remain anonymous. you don't actually know someone's history. You don't know whether they helped another player 5 minutes ago or betrayed someone 30 seconds earlier. You only know the immediate risk that they may represent, and that uncertainty naturally pushes players towards caution first, not because they're hostile, but because they lack information. In other words, the system doesn't punish betrayal very much, but it does punish misplaced trust. And when those incentives exist, then players start to adapt very quickly. Now, despite all of this and everything that I've said, of course cooperation still happens. Two raiders hold fire while dealing with an Ark patrol, for example. Players sometimes share information through proximity chat. Occasionally, temporary alliances form long enough to survive a dangerous encounter. You can clear a patrol together, you can loot the area as a duo, and then both players quietly move on. There's no betrayal, no sudden backstabs here, just a moment of cooperation between two strangers who decided, even for a few minutes, that working together was just worth the risk. And these moments are, of course, memorable. When trust succeeds in a system that of course discourages it, the experience becomes meaningful. You remember the stranger who didn't shoot, you remember the unexpected cooperation, and you remember the moment that both players walked away alive. Ironically, the lack of trust within the system is exactly what makes those moments so powerful, because they feel like something you weren't supposed to get away with. There was a situation I had recently after following the expedition. I was on Bluegate near Ancient Fort, and there was a raider that was downed by 2 fireflies. There was another raider in the distance that of course had seen the flare, much like myself, and he openly on proximity chat decided to try to interact with the player who was downed by calling himself a field medic. I can't remember his username of course, but it was something along the lines of "I'm Dr. Username." And as he approached, I also openly engaged in proximity chat and said, "I've heard the sound effect of him surrendering, so I don't think we can defib this guy." Eventually we end up talking about how I've just finished the expedition and I'm restarting. The guy genuinely dropped me an Arpeggio 4 with some attachments and some ammunition and said, "Good luck out there," and that was the interaction we held. Now, what makes that moment powerful for me is because of the trust dynamic here. He didn't assume that I had killed him. We both saw the flare. We both came to a logical conclusion that the Ark were responsible, and we opted to then cooperate for that brief moment within the area while also obtaining some extra loot thanks to his friendliness. Now, over time, players can start adapting to these types of situations and dynamics. Some become extremely cautious, some avoid all interactions entirely, and others lean into aggression, assuming betrayal is inevitable. And a smaller group tries to build trust wherever possible, using proximity chat, signalling, or simply lowering their weapon first, as to the description of my experience recently. What's interesting is how these behaviours start spreading then through the community. Players start sharing stories, clips can circulate online, somebody posts a video about getting betrayed after helping another raider, and slowly those stories begin shaping expectations. New players hear them, veterans repeat them, and before long a kind of cultural rule begins to form. Don't trust anybody topside. Now, whether that rule is actually true or not almost doesn't matter, because once players believe it, they start behaving accordingly. So as always, what does this actually tell us about Ark Raiders and us as players? Well, first it shows how strong player psychology shapes the experience we're having. Trust isn't just a social concept, it's actually a design outcome in this case. When risk is high, information is limited and encounters are temporary, then players naturally become more cautious. Secondly, it highlights something interesting about the game's design philosophy. Ark Raiders gives players a huge amount of autonomy, as we've discussed previously. You can cooperate, you can betray, and you can avoid everyone entirely. The game doesn't force a moral framework on you, it simply creates the conditions where those decisions matter. And finally then, it raises a question that the community is still openly debating. Is the lack of trust a problem? Or is it exactly what makes the game so compelling in the first place, because the distrust creates tension? It makes every encounter unpredictable with another raider. You never quite know whether the player you just met will help you survive or end your run entirely. But at the same time, too much distrust can limit the kinds of interactions that players are willing to attempt, and that balance is something the community is still figuring out together. So now I'm curious, Raiders, when you encounter another Raider Topside, how do you personally approach it? Do you try to instantly cooperate, or do you assume betrayal? Or have your experiences pushed you towards one approach over the other? Let me know in the comments, guys, because I'm genuinely curious how different players handle these very situations. And if you enjoy exploring the deeper psychology behind Arc Raiders, the systems, our behaviour, and the design choices that help shape how we interact topside, then consider subscribing to the channel, because there's a lot more happening beneath the surface of this game than it might seem at first. And conversations like this are only just the beginning. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you topside.